and welcome to the CUInsight Network. My name is Lauren Culp. I'm the publisher and CEO at CUInsight.com, and it is my job on this show to have conversations with the thought leaders who support the credit union community. We are going to identify those issues that are really affecting credit unions and have a discussion on best practices so that we can all gain a few nuggets we can learn from and improve our credit unions with. My guest on the show today is Stephen Jones, the Senior Director of Cybersecurity at Dataprise. I'm super excited to have you here, Stephen. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Lauren.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into the conversation. I'd like to start with a little bit of background on you because most of us didn't really grow up thinking that someday we'd get to work with credit unions. So what did you want to be growing up? And what was the inspiration to take the gig as Senior Director of Cybersecurity at Dataprise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I was one of the very few fortunate kids that knew exactly what I wanted to be growing up. And as it turns out, it materialized. I wanted to be in the tech field. I grew up with my dad running a computer business in our house. And that's where I, from a very young age, got exposed to technology and just quickly became enamored with it and spent every waking moment learning and reading as much as I could.
That's amazing. I think when we think about knowing what we want to do as children, I know that that's never something that I did, especially kind of getting into the credit union side of things. So, what was your inspiration then to take the gig at Dataprise?
Well, I was actually just coming off of a long stint. I was the co-founder of another MSSP and had grown that from being the very first employee into a very successful business, still a very successful business today. And I was looking for a new challenge. My Actually being able to join Dataprise is a bit of a funny story. It was kind of a right place, right time situation where one of their recruiters was looking at my LinkedIn profile and was hoping that I could make connections to people that I knew for this position. And after talking to them for just a little bit and really getting a good feel for what they were looking to do and what kind of person they were looking for, I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And a few days later, I had a great conversation with our CEO, Steve Lewis, who was also kind of coming in new to the organization. And his vision really aligned with mine. And for how I think an organization should approach growing and maturing a cybersecurity business. And it really felt right. And Steve felt the same way. So here I am.
That's incredible. I love when the vision that you have for going into a role really aligns with the vision that the company and the organization has as well. So let's pretend that you and I meet at a conference in person. Hopefully, we'll get back there sometime soon. Could you give us your elevator pitch on what Dataprise is and where you really add value to credit unions?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dataprise is the leading strategic IT solution provider for mid-market IT leaders who believe that technology should allow you to be the best at what you do. So our IT solutions and services are tailored to the needs of the strategic CIO to provide best-in-class managed security, network, infrastructure, collaboration, and end-user solutions. And where we add value to a credit union is by the nature of our being simultaneously an MSP and an MSSP. So we provide the integrated solutions that cover not only the cybersecurity needs of a credit union, but we can also help from the infrastructure and business side of the house as well. By virtue of these services being provided by the same company, there's a lot of valuable interconnections between our teams, which means we have a greater level of insight into what's happening with our clients.
So if someone was wondering, you said the different, you're both an MSP and an MSSP. What would you explain the difference of that to someone who maybe doesn't know what that means?
No, it's a great question. So, an MSP, a managed service provider, is really a service that's dedicated to managing lots of different types of services for an organization or for a customer. An MSSP, a managed security service provider, is really tailored to the cybersecurity services. So things like SOC monitoring, endpoint protection, incident response, and forensics. So it's a little bit more niche, where MSP is a bit broader and encompasses things like help desk, network and infrastructure, policy, and some of the other business related aspects of services.
Amazing. Well, as we prepared for the show, we were talking about a couple of situations that are important to credit unions. I'd like to really start with what it looks like to transform the credit union business model through maybe some risk reduction. What do you see happening in this space that credit unions might really want to consider in terms of achieving sustained growth and a competitive advantage in financial services?
So I think risk reduction for credit unions really needs to start with a focus on critical infrastructure. Attacks are getting much more sophisticated. They're causing larger outages, much more significant impacts. And so I think credit unions should really ensure that their critical infrastructure, the stuff that they need to function on a day to day, is not only being monitored, but also being hardened. They also need to establish a set of metrics by which they can constantly assess the posture, the readiness, the ability to identify critical issues before they happen. And last, I think credit unions should really ensure that they've got a robust cybersecurity capability, whether it's in house or outsourced, with the tools and technologies that are needed to protect their assets and to respond to incidents when they happen.
Well, you talk about this idea, the cybersecurity. I mean, that's huge. Everyone's talking about cybersecurity, and so credit unions really have both the opportunity and maybe the driving need to enhance some of the cybersecurity that they're able to implement. So, two questions. First, can you talk about what you would consider maybe one of the most important practices or concepts for credit unions to focus on in their cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most important places for a credit union to focus to enhance cybersecurity is really to start evaluating your technology partners and your vendors. And this is because supply chain attacks are on the rise. And we've just seen this with Kaseya and numerous ones before leading up to that and before that. SolarWinds being another good example. So not only evaluating the partners, but making sure that when you're implementing their technologies, that you're doing so securely and with industry best practice to really help limit impacts from a supply chain attack, and keep yourself safe.
And then what tips would you have for a credit union from maybe more of a security architecture standpoint? Are there any things you would say definitely don't forget about this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest trends right now, and for a good reason, is moving towards zero trust architecture. And this is really a good move for credit unions. And just to give the audience a bit of definition there, zero trust networks function on the premise that you can't trust anyone or anything. So zero trust adds a real high level of scrutiny to every transaction, every interaction on the network, and verifies that the source that is doing that action is allowed to do that action. So more and more as transactions are moving online, especially as we're looking at now different variants of the COVID virus and potentially having additional impacts that are going to limit our ability to be in person, credit unions, like a lot of other businesses, are moving more and more to online transactions. As this happens, this increases opportunities for attackers to exploit vulnerabilities, to compromise online activity. And zero trust is just one really good step forward to help credit unions increase the security and reduce risk when it's implemented properly.
Well, and I think, as we think about what credit union CEOs are kind of up at night worrying about this idea of security, you hear so many, so many stories and read so many articles
Yeah.
about cybersecurity and the issues with it. So I think that this is definitely something that really resonates or is top of mind for leaders in the industry. As we wrap up this first part of the show, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about the future. And those are questions I'm really excited to ask. So, Dataprise, such an innovative company. Break out the crystal ball for me. I mean, we've seen a lot of disruptions in financial services over the past few years, and there's no doubt that there are a lot more disruptions to come. So, what trends are you seeing, and where is Dataprise's focus when it comes to really innovating to meet these challenges?
I think a lot of the trends that we're seeing right now are around organizations trying to enhance their visibility, to ensure that they have visibility to see when things are happening in the environment. Um, Using the crystal ball a bit and having a good inside track on what Dataprise is doing for this, we're really focusing on beefing up our cybersecurity offerings, making sure that we're leading with orchestration and automation. This is a fundamental thing that I think has to happen in security. Things move way too fast to rely on people to catch everything. And so we're really putting a heavy emphasis on making sure that we're building SOAR use cases, which is security, orchestration, automation, remediation, and focusing on having our systems really help cull through the enormous amounts of data we're dealing with from our customers.
I think from the credit union side, a lot of times we do hear that there's so much data they have accessible, and it's really about how you use it, and making sure that we are providing it to all levels of the organization without siloing it. So definitely, really critical to be able to think about the long term viability of the credit union business model in general. Is there something that you think that credit unions need to do better to stay relevant in this fast changing financial services marketplace?
So I think credit unions have a really good opportunity to be seen as leaders and pioneers in this space, especially in the cybersecurity space. Larger financial institutions, while they do have the larger budgets, tend to be very large and not as able to pivot and move quickly. Trends are changing very fast. And so I think credit unions, by the very nature of them being on the smaller side, can really be nimble and more agile and able to adapt as security trends change. So I think they have a great opportunity to really lead the way and to kind of show to their customers, why you should be using a credit union. It's why I use a credit union, because my credit union is much more nimble than a Bank of America or something like that. And it's because they have the ability to do that. And I think, again, this is really a good place for them to be seen as leaders and pioneers in the cybersecurity space.
It's so true. Credit unions, we've even seen some interesting examples over the last year and a half as credit unions are responding to COVID and some of the things that they're able to pivot and shift to do, even
Yeah,
on the member side, even on the employee experience side. I heard about a credit union who brought in tutors for all of the children of their staff so that their staff could continue to work. And there are just so many cool examples that happen, to your point, when you're a little bit on the smaller side, able to be nimble and adaptive to sort of the needs of both your employees,
yeah,
of your membership. So and I think we've all kind of seen those moments where the credit union is able to maybe give a little bit more of a human touch to something that a big bank might reject kind of out of hand. So
sure. Yeah,
that's a good point. Well, as we wrap up a little bit today, I'd like to have some fun with these rapid fire questions that we like to do to really let our listeners get to know you better. So, who is Steven, and what do you like? Where do you come from? So, just like we have the CUInsight Experience podcast, our other podcasts, the questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So, first rapid question here: what is a recent purchase you didn't know you needed, but that has become something that you cannot live without?
that's actually an easy one because I used it just before coming on this podcast, and that is my beard straightener. Something that I honestly never thought in a million years that I would need as a guy that doesn't have hair. But I will tell you that I use it every day, and I'm not sure I could function without it.
That is amazing. A beard straightener. Okay, so I use a hair straightener, but I can't say
Exactly.
that I have any use for a beard straightener, but that is incredible. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Ooh, man, that is a great question. So many people come to mind. Um, I would say one of the first people to come to mind when you say success is going to be probably this is an odd one, but Gary Vaynerchuk
Okay.
is a great example of that, and that's a guy who came from very little and has really created a huge empire. And I really dig his attitude about getting out there, making sure you're doing something, and love watching his YouTube videos and Instagram as well.
Absolutely. Super inspiring. All
Yeah.
right, random question. What is the greatest album of all time, or what are you listening to on Spotify is your other option if you're not an album listener?
Wow. So I'm a big music person. So answering the greatest album of all time, very, very challenging. However, to break your question down, so Spotify, I'm mainly listening to Joe Rogan's podcast on that. That keeps my mind fresh. All kinds of interesting guests there. But I listen to a lot of country music. So if I'm not listening to a podcast, I'm really into Luke Combs' album "This One's for You,"
Okay.
and I could play that on repeat all the time.
I love it. Yeah, I'm a big Spotify user. I can't say I listen to many albums from start to finish anymore, but a big Spotify playlist person. Any
Yeah.
books that you have either gifted or think that everyone should read?
Yes. There is a wonderful book called Essentialism by Greg McEwen. And I think everybody should read this book because I think over COVID, this really became much more important to me. I feel that I'm often very busy, but not always productive. And the book really helped change my mind about how I should work and really focus on the essentialist things instead of focusing on getting more done. Really just focus on getting the right things done. So I've given this book to other people. I actually got this as part of some leadership training, and it really changed the way I work and the way I expect people that work for me to work as well. So I would say, yeah, Essentialism by Greg McEwen, Audible, Amazon. Please go check it out. It's a great book.
Essentialism. I will add that to my list here. I've got a number of books I've been meaning to check out, but I love the concept.
Awesome.
All right, let's say the calendar is empty. You don't have anything planned for the weekend. What would you do to unwind outside of work?
Well, my wife and I actually live on and work on a horse farm. So I live
Okay.
out in the middle of nowhere. So we do equine rescue. We actually save horses from slaughter, rehabilitate them, get them back to health, and try and find them forever homes. So on a weekend where there's really nothing going on, we're probably down at the barn, hanging out with horses, riding horses. That's a pretty solid bet.
Okay, incredible. I love that. That reminds me of Molly Bell also has an animal rescue in her sort of backyard there. So really cool if you haven't connected with Molly Bell, she's over at End Credit Union. She would definitely be a good one to chat about.
Oh,
They have
awesome.
a couple horses I think too that they rescued. So love to hear that. We will link to everything we talked about in the show notes today so that all of our listeners can get connected to that. I'm curious, my last question for you, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share or any asks that you have for our listeners today?
Hey, first off, I just want to thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully, we can do it again. I guess my parting words would really be to ask your listeners spay and neuter those pets. Please patch your machines, focus on the essential stuff, and take cybersecurity as seriously as a heart attack.
Absolutely. Well, what a great way to end it. Don't forget, spay and neuter your pets. Cybersecurity is serious. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today on the CUInsight Network podcast. We, again, will link to everything that we talked about here in the show notes for you. Be well, my friend, and everyone listening. Thanks so much for tuning in to the CUInsight Network.